So Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow for talks on the war in Ukraine, among other topics.
Now, do keep in mind, several days ago, July the 1st, Hungary took over the presidency of the Council of the European Union. However, this visit has been criticized by EU leaders, as we've just seen, who emphasize that Orban is not acting on their behalf.
And to discuss this, we're joined by Sergei Erofeev, sociologist from Rutgers University. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you on.
Hello, Sally. Hi, Ben.
So let me ask you about perhaps real reasons, and I want to talk about economics. So Hungary is still dependent on Russian gas, if I'm not mistaken. Do you think that this was perhaps the real reason for his visit?
Well, it could be one of the reasons. There are more fundamental reasons, which of cultural nature. You know, these two guys, Mr. Putin and Mr. Orban, they need really very good zoologists, if not to say sociologists, a very good zoologists to look at these different species in order to define the true underlying things about their behavior. So they behave in a certain way, and we need to understand why they behave in this particular way. So for Mr. Orban, the gas for his country is, of course, a factor. But what is more important is that he's pursuing his own goals. And this is a higher priority for him than his own country. He is at the same time different from Mr. Putin, who also doesn't care about his country. But he cares about certain elements of his information war, which is the main war going on right now. So both Mr. Putin and Mr. Orban behave in a certain way, showing that they are in need of each other. But the fundamental things of their culture are different. While Mr. Orban's main goal in life and political life for him is still pleasure, for Mr. Putin, the main problem is his fear. He's doing whatever is seen by him as absolutely necessary in a particular moment of time, looking at his personal security situation. So, of course, he would like to make an impression that the European Union is not united and that there are people in the European Union who are ready to support him, which is not entirely true. So Mr. Orban is pursuing his own goals, as I just said, because he wants to remain and to be liked by his own people. And he's not in the same situation of deadly threats if he steps down from power, unlike Mr. Putin. So he's trying to balance between his own people, Mr. Putin, and the European Union.
Right, and I'd also like to ask you about the timing, because, of course, like we mentioned earlier, this happens on the heels of Hungary taking over the EU presidency, the rotating presidency. And after that, Viktor Orban has went to Ukraine and then subsequently going to Russia. Do you think that he's trying to leverage Hungary's position in this presidency to sort of get some kind of gains?
I think Mr. Orban knew perfectly well that his shuttle diplomacy action will not be welcomed, specifically if he positions himself as representing the European Union. He knew that perfectly well. So the reaction of his Western European partners doesn't really matter much for him in this sense. What matters more for him is his situation in the country, because he's still thinking of how to endure politically in Hungary and to show his people that he's a European leader and that Hungary has now European presidency and that Mr. Orban can do something about that to show his strength as a politician who can manage the things which no other politician in Europe can manage, because he said it many times today that maybe Hungary will remain the only country which can go both ways, to talk to one side and to the other side. So he just is trying to blow up his importance, I suspect, first of all, judging sociologically, looking at the internal perspective and the moods of the Hungarian people.
Right, sir. So you're saying also that Orban is influenced by fear a little bit, right? Because we've got Peter Magyar getting more support within Hungary. So what will be Orban's next steps?
Well, he knows perfectly well that his shuttle diplomacy will bring no fruit. And he just wants to save a good face during the Hungarian presidency in the European Union. I think that's the maximum what he actually desires. And he can't change the mind of Mr. Putin or Mr. Zelensky. He knows perfectly well that Europe supports Ukraine, who wants to liberate all of its territories. And what is the other very interesting moment when Mr. Putin spoke today after the meeting, he said that Ukraine needs a prolongation of this war. He says that Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, avoided presidential re-election procedure this year, and as long as the war lasts, he stays in power, because after the end of the war, he will not be welcomed by the Ukrainian people as president anymore. That's Mr. Putin's suggestion, but what he actually gives away here is his own situation. Putin's protracted war serves exactly that purpose, and he knows perfectly well that Ukraine will not give up those territories in the 4 Ukrainian regions, as Mr. Putin suggests. He knows perfectly well that as long as the war lasts and lasts and drags on, Mr. Putin is more or less safe, oppressing the Russian people and showing that there is every reason not to come back to any kind of political life within the country, which is of enormous threat for his rule. So the war is an instrumental thing. It continues to be instrumental. It was started by Mr. Putin just in order to stay in power in Russia, because otherwise he would have faced presidential elections of 2024, only to find himself in the same position as Mr. Lukashenko in 2020, losing his legitimacy within the country. So Mr. Putin has lost his legitimacy on the international arena, but he's losing his legitimacy within Russia not so quickly. So that was the whole purpose of this war. So he wants this protracted war, and in the presence of Mr. Orban, he had a beautiful opportunity to say a few more lies, including the lie that Ukraine wants to continue with this war.
Sir, so let me ask you about Western leaders. Why they're not doing more to bring Orban back into the fold?
That's a good question. And that's why we need a good sociologist, or as I said, zoologist, to study Mr. Orban's behavior. Although they are both authoritarian leaders, Mr. Orban is still very different from Mr. Putin. First of all, structurally speaking, he's not in the same situation of a deadly threat coming from his own people, as that is true for Mr. Putin. Therefore, the European leaders should really evaluate Mr. Orban's behavior in such a way that they will get a very good tool. The word tool was nicely used today, as we know. A very good tool to bring Mr. Orban back to his senses. He, like a Mr. Putin, easily gives in the right kind of pressure. But what is needed here is to find exactly the right kind of pressure so that Mr. Orban will have to step back and stop playing such games with Mr. Putin. And Europe can do it.
Right. Thank you so much for your input and insights, sir. And that's Mr. Sergei Erofeev, sociologist from Rutgers University. Thank you so much for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.